Today on Off the Clock, we're going to talk about a national phenomenon, a wave of lawsuits challenging organizations' ADA compliance based on their websites. We're going to tell you what you can do now to avoid those lawsuits, what to do if you receive one of those lawsuits, and you may want to share this with your IT department.
Welcome to Off the Clock, the webcast of employment attorneys at Miller Johnson, where we discuss what is happening in the HR world and provide practical insight and advice.
Hi, Sarah.
Well, good morning, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm wondering whether our website is ADA accessible. That's how I am.
We're not going to discuss that on this podcast, but for anyone watching, yes.
Right. Yes.
Just yes.
It is. Oh, good.
Just
good.
yes.
Got it. Okay.
We have actually been working behind the scenes here at Miller Johnson and a lot of the things.
Making sure we're up to speed. Well, look at us doing what we're
Yeah.
advising our clients to do.
The cobbler's children do have shoes. Every once in a while.
That's right.
So what are we even talking about? We're laughing. We know what we're talking about, but no one else listening knows what we're talking about.
That's right.
So let's tell them. It's not a straight up employment issue, to be fair, right? Because
No.
normally we just talk about employment issues, but it is something that ends up landing on HR's desk.
It is because it involves the ADA.
Yep.
So, as far as I can tell, when people see ADA, they think it belongs in the HR department or on our desks, one or the other, right?
We hear from I will hear
yes.
from the HR
Yeah,
person.
exactly.
When a client lands one of these, I think because no one else really understands what the ADA is, and they're just excited that someone in the organization has said ADA before. And so that's the person they bring in to handle the lawsuit.
Right.
But these lawsuits are really not employment related at all. There's another part of the ADA, Title III,
Yep.
that has to do with accessibility of places for
Right.
people
Right.
with qualifying disabilities,
Yep.
right? And so we think about it a lot historically in terms of certain parking spots, ramps at entrances, larger stalls in the bathrooms. Everyone's familiar, I think,
Absolutely.
with those types of things that deal with physical spaces and mobility issues. But we also see visual impairment. We see Braille on elevator buttons,
Correct.
right, and things like that.
Yes. So the idea is places of public accommodation, places
Yeah.
where the public go or can go,
Yep.
have to be accessible to individuals with disabilities. That's the basic concept.
Yep. And when it comes to what I'm about to talk about today, we're talking about people with visual impairments, which does not mean totally blind necessarily, but people with visual impairments.
Okay.
And this is where, what I'm about to say is where the rubber hits the road. The courts and the DOJ, the Department of Justice, have said that websites are places
Of public accommodation.
that also have to be accessible.
Well, that makes sense to me, really.
So-
a website is a place where the public can go, not
Yep.
physically. We don't jump into our computer. But I can see myself having dealt with Title III issues and cases. I'm thinking about the definition of what a place of public accommodation is, and it makes sense to me.
I should say it's not a foregone conclusion. It actually has led to some very interesting discussions about what is the internet.
Right.
Is it an actual place, or is it a series of zeros and ones, right? That just is sent. You know, is it information that's transmitted?
Oh,
For
interesting.
instance, it's actually a very technological, intellectually challenging topic, in my opinion, to decide whether an internet site is a physical location of something. And I will say it is still somewhat unsettled in some courts. But there are enough courts
Yeah.
combined with the Department of Justice that lawyers, plaintiffs' lawyers, right, lawyers wanting to sue, alleging violations of the ADA, have gotten very, very interested in pursuing these types of lawsuits, right?
Yeah,
There's
so
enough
how does
there.
this work? Yeah, so how does this work? What are we seeing? And I know
Yeah.
we've seen it firsthand. I mean, this is something that's happening.
Oh, yes. Yep, we handle these.
Impacting employers all over the country, including even in West Michigan, have gotten sued because
Yep.
their websites have allegedly not been accessible to individuals with visual impairments, right?
We have certainly seen an uptick just with our clients. And then a couple of weeks ago, there was a Wall Street Journal article on these types of lawsuits. There was legislation pending in Congress. It's not going anywhere, it seems, to curb these types of lawsuits because they are exploding. Just to give you an idea,
Okay.
in 2022, there were 3,225 of these lawsuits, which was a 12% increase over 2021.
Okay.
And then in 2023, I should mention also in 2022, the DOJ put out some guidance, basically explaining its position that internet websites were places of public accommodation
Okay.
that needed to be accessible. So then we saw a 42% increase in these lawsuits in 2022, and then in 2023 over 2022. In 2024, we're expecting a similar jump, right, in lawsuits. What's interesting to me is where they're being filed.
Yeah.
Of the 222 lawsuits filed just in 1 month in June of 2024, 123 of them were filed in New York, in the state of New York, 44 in Florida, 19 in California, 36 in other. And it is possible, no matter where your physical headquarters, right, and facilities are, that if your website is accessible in New York or California or Florida in a hospitable jurisdiction, if you will, to these types of lawsuits, that you can be brought into court there.
In New York, wow. So
Which
it
is
could be
very frustrating and annoying. to
sure,
folks here.
right. You could have a small business in, let's just take West Michigan, right? One location, maybe in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with a website, and you're saying that business with only one physical location in Grand Rapids, Michigan, could be sued in the state of New York on this issue.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, we have seen that with our clients. Now, to be fair, there are some defenses that we can assert if that happens, but you still have to assert them, right? You still have to
You're still in
show
court.
up
Yeah, right, exactly.
in New York and
It's
assert
kind of a
them.
chicken or egg. It's a circular.
As we're
yes,
going
got
to
it.
talk about many of
Okay.
these settle early and for not a lot of money, so we don't ever get to the argument about that.
Yeah.
But it's not a foregone conclusion, but there is enough of a hook. There's plaintiffs have a good faith argument at
Okay.
least that
Got
they
it.
can sue you in those places.
So
if that
what
makes
is the
sense.
legal, what is it that these lawsuits are alleging that these businesses have not done specifically?
Yep, the lawsuits, well, let me back up for a moment. People with visual impairments navigate the internet through technology called, there's various terms, but basically visual readers or devices, technology that assists them, that maybe read out loud
Oh, cool. Okay.
what is on the screen.
Right.
Does this make sense?
Yes,
Right.
sure.
And so to sum it up, I mean, the allegations are actually very technical when you get into the complaints, but basically the websites are not up to snuff, right? Aren't updated enough or configured in such a way to allow those readers
Okay.
to read the website content to
I
the
see.
visually impaired
Okay.
user.
Already more
But-
IT for me than I can understand.
I can just give you a
absorb,
little
but yes.
IT light, meaning even I can understand it, but it really goes much deeper than that.
Yes, right.
For
okay.
instance, pictures on a website should have a text alternative under each one, right? And sometimes you might even see this in your
Oh,
emails.
I've seen that,
right? When the
yes.
pictures are too large, so it gives you the text alternative. And
It
it'll say
describes them.
Image, Niagara Falls, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. If you don't have that alternate text aligned with each image, then the reader can't tell the visually impaired person what the
Interesting.
picture is of. It can deal with color variations and color contrast, because for the visual readers to work, there has to be sufficient contrast between the background and the text,
Okay.
right? So if you do dark blue on a light blue background, for instance, I'm just making that up now, but don't quote me on that. But that's a sort of thing, right, that could be unhelpful. Another area that comes up is where the keyboard is not available to navigate the web page. If it's mouse only,
Oh,
that can be difficult for people with visual impairments.
Okay.
So what we're not talking about is just make the font bigger on your website,
Yeah.
right? Like it's actually quite complicated,
Yeah,
or
right.
it can be. It's not impossible. People do it. People get compliant. There's a standard out there, which I have, which we will not be going into in detail, but your IT people will want to look at
I see.
the
Right.
WCAG2.
WCAG.
That stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That's what the courts use, plaintiffs' attorneys use, and the Department of Justice use to determine, they use those guidelines
Okay.
to determine whether your website is doing what it needs to do. I will tell you, I tried to read through it. It's a different language. It's just a different language. It's for your IT people, okay? But it's
So
for your
what-
IT. But there is guidance out
Okay,
there. We're not it's not just no one really knows what we're supposed to do here.
For the listeners, the takeaway right now is this is a problem that the lawyers can identify, but not solve.
Well, we
We need your IT folks to help with the solution,
absolutely. And
but we can tell you that there's a problem that needs to be solved.
there is
Yes.
a cottage industry that has sprouted up that includes a few different players.
Okay.
One is plaintiffs, law firms that just do this type of work.
Yeah,
And I'm
they
gonna
just
get
sued-
into
they-
that a
yes,
little bit
there's
more in a
probably
second.
lawyers that are just online all day long finding websites
The
that
lawyers
they're going
don't
to say
do
are
it.
not compliant.
That's a great segue. Oh my
Yes.
God, I love it
Who
when this
does it?
happens.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to get back to the plaintiffs' lawyers and how they operate. The next is defense firms that only do this. So when you
Yeah.
get sued, you can expect your email box to be flooded with advertisements from defense firms that only defend these.
Okay.
Basically, it's volume work for both of those types of law firms. And then the third entity that popped up is website accessibility specialists. And what they do is they go through, for much lower cost than lawyers,
Yeah, that's
and they
a good
just go
point.
through a gazillion websites and test whether they are up to this standard that I just cited you or not. And if they're not, a lot of times the plaintiffs' law firms have hired them, right, to do that. On the other hand, there's also these third parties that will work with your organization to get you up to speed, either after listening to this podcast to be proactive or after being sued, right? You
Okay.
can
Got it.
You can work with one of these third party IT specialists that do just this. If your IT department doesn't have the capacity, right, or the specialization to do what needs to be done to the website. Let's talk about the plaintiffs' law firms for just a second.
Okay, let's
I know they deal in volume.
of course.
And
right.
so they tend to hook up with certain plaintiffs who have visual impairments, who connect with certain law firms, and then they work in tandem and they can file 100 lawsuits in a day.
I see. So the plaintiff firms are representing actual individuals
Mm-hmm.
who assert that they tried to access
You got it.
Miller Johnson's website
Yep.
and were not able to do so because
Correct.
it didn't comply with the standards that you just
Yep.
whatever to the blah blah blah.
And
to.
they file lots and lots every month.
I see.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
That is what they do after they hire one of these third
This
parties.
is
to
similar,
scan
by the way.
web.
Can I just say there was a slew of lawsuits a number of years ago against financial institutions with ATM machines
Yeah.
that were not accessible to visually impaired individuals because the buttons didn't have the raised braille. So anyway, this
Mm-hmm. Yep.
is this is the next generation. It's just perfect, right?
The
we're
next
going
generation.
we're going from on-site machines now to websites.
Right.
Got it.
So what types of organizations need to really pay attention to this? People that sell things online.
Okay.
That's who these plaintiffs' law firms are going after, right?
Okay.
If you sell something online, which makes sense,
Which is a lot of our
because let's just
clients, I think. I
Well,
would think
sure.
a lot of our listeners.
it can
are
be
selling
products too, by the way, products
that's what I mean.
or services, right?
services or products.
Right,
okay?
because that's how a random John Doe in New York can sue you, right? Because
Right.
he or she is trying to buy something,
Claiming-
allegedly buy something online.
Yes.
I
I want to buy a dress. and
website.
I wanted a dress and I couldn't.
Yes,
I couldn't
right.
buy it because okay.
If it's a different type of website about just promoting your nonprofit or other things, yes, you should still be up to speed if you can, but it's going to be harder for someone to show, right? That they were harmed in
makes
some
sense.
way, that they went to your website and it wasn't accessible for them. So the DOJ, the Department of Justice, as I mentioned, issued guidance in 2022, which I think really pushed, right, a lot of this to the forefront. And they said, in their opinion, right, websites are places subject to Title III
Okay.
of the ADA. Again, it's not totally settled yet. We won't get into all the arguments as to why or why not they are places. But that kicked off and pushed forward a lot of this litigation. And in 2024, the Department of Justice promulgated a new rule, a final rule, so not just a draft rule or suggested rule. It's past the comment period. It's a final rule, but it applies only to state and local governments. We do have some of those listeners.
Right.
And it requires state and local governments to comply with that
I see.
standard,
Okay.
the WCAG2, and it provides a little more detail than that, to its web services in which
Okay.
they interact with the public. So not for their internal internet stuff, but anything dealing with voter registration, et cetera, anything, driver's license renewal, right? Anything where they're
Yeah.
interacting with
Makes
the public.
sense, right?
But that is only, in case people hear about it, that's only, the rule only applies to state and local governments. But that is the standard, that is the subject of the lawsuit.
So what are the penalties?
Interesting. Under the federal ADA, which is how we framed this conversation,
Yep.
if you have violated an accommodation, if your site is not accessible to
you're
people
a
who
place
need
of public
accommodations, then the plaintiff is entitled to what we call injunctive relief only. That means no money, right? They are entitled to require you to install a ramp, for instance, to require you to add parking for people who are disabled, to require you to change the design of your bathroom so that they can access it because they use a wheelchair, but they're not entitled to dollars.
Okay.
So remember what I said at the beginning about how so many of these are filed in New York?
Yeah.
Guess what New York has?
Oh, damages. So some
New York has
states have their own
state
laws.
law
Okay.
that mirrors in large part the ADA,
I
but it
see.
includes monetary
Yeah,
damages
but with an important
for
addition.
violations.
But with an important addition, right?
Yes,
Money
and
money at
attorney's
stake.
fees.
Okay. And
Yes,
attorney's fees.
and
Got it.
attorney's fees, right? So that is why we see so many of these filed in New York.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why. It makes sense from a plaintiff's lawyer point of view,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
Okay, so what does one do if they get hit with one of these lawsuits? Because they are becoming more and more popular and prevalent. The good news is most of them settle very quickly and for not a lot of money. A lot of them even in the four figures, right? So it's okay. No one likes to be sued, especially in New York or California.
Right.
But take a deep breath, right? Call us. We'll get you through it quickly and painlessly. And then those settlement agreements usually are for a low amount of money and then do require you to make some sort of promise that you're going to be compliant. In the future, you're going to work with one of these third parties to ensure compliance, et cetera.
That makes sense.
So,
Right.
so that's it. So no, again, it's frustrating. It's scary when you get hit with a lawsuit because they hit very small businesses as well as big. They don't really care, to be honest with you.
So if we have listeners who are thinking, well, compliance is important to us regardless of whether there's a lot of money at stake or
Yep.
the ability to resolve it. Compliance is important. What I hear you saying is there are specific guidelines in place for which it's possible the organization's IT department has the sophistication to ensure that the website is in compliance if it's not already. And if not, there's third parties available to help with that.
Yep.
What do you have a sense of what the cost is for businesses that are not yet compliant but need to get into compliance? Are we talking
It varies
$100,000?
greatly depending on the sophistication of the website, to be honest with
Okay.
you, but it's usually less than the settlement.
Okay.
In the same range, but less. But it really depends, right?
Okay.
Because websites sometimes can have 5 pages, or they can have 500,
Yeah. Right.
and that sort of thing. But yes, it's a good idea to work with your IT department, or have your IT department work with a third party to get your website up to speed.
Sure.
I also think it's helpful for folks who might be in the process of finding a web developer to redo their website, maybe. Ask about this. Make sure they're aware, right,
Yeah.
of this risk.
That it's accessible to everybody. Well, I mean, any business that is selling goods and services in particular, obviously it's also to their advantage that their website is accessible to as many
Yeah.
individuals as possible.
They can sell to more people.
They can, the point is, I think,
Yeah.
for the website to be accessible to as many people as possible. So.
And to poke fun at myself for a minute, I'll leave you out of it. But as we all age,
Yeah.
most of us will become visually impaired. Just like most of us will become hearing impaired at some
Yeah.
point, right? It's not an if, it's a when. So instead of thinking about it as, well, I'm not prioritizing that segment of the community maybe, or the population, right, for my good or services, just remember
Yeah.
that it's going to be all of us.
All right.
We all started this without glasses, right, Sarah?
That,
Now we're both
I was
wearing
just going to
glasses.
say, those of us who have been with us since the beginning have watched an important transition for both of us, which is we started off like this, and now both of us are wearing readers.
I now have bifocals, and I had to increase the font, like on my on everything that runs through Microsoft now. So I am on my way, right. to needing help at some point.
So key takeaways for our listeners today?
Key takeaways: be proactive with your IT department to test current compliance. If you're looking at redoing your website, make sure whoever's redoing it is aware of the standards and are doing it. And if you do get hit with a lawsuit, which are becoming, again, very common, don't panic. Right?
Perfect.
It will be okay. It is not a bet the business type of a lawsuit.
Perfect. Thanks,
Okay.
Rebecca.
Thank you.